Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. We have premium medicinal cannabis and accessories to get you on track. Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. All aboard!
Hello everyone and welcome to the Vintage Roundtable Races. I'm Larry Seidlinger, your host for tonight's show, and we have two of the best that ever run a racetrack here in Maine. We've got the wild man from Waterville, former race car driver Pete Silver, retired now by the gray hairs, and we have the pride and joy of Newburgh, Maine, Ricky Craven with us, and I am so honored and blessed. Pete and I have had tons of hours talking about this show. I've had so much fun talking with Pete, learning all about NASCAR, and I'm just like super over the top thrilled. I'm ready to get in the car and go 100 miles an hour right now talking to Ricky Craven. So thank you, gentlemen, both for sitting down and taking some time out of your busy day, and we hope we can entertain the folks at home for the next hour, and let's talk some racing.
Let's do it.
Sounds great, Larry. Thank you.
Well, before we get into it too deep, both of you guys had dads that had quite a big influence on your start in racing. Pete, tell us a little bit about what your dad was, who's a Hall of Famer himself.
Yes, he started, I think, in around 1950, and I was born in 48, so it was really a little before I realized everything was going on. But before I was 10, I was at the racetrack every weekend while he was racing, and obviously it was an easy transition as I got older. And we grew up in an era where everybody was a car guy. It was kind of the American graffiti of
every gas station.
Yeah, every gas station had a race car, and it was just an easy transformation for me when I got old enough and was able to piece enough stuff together to try to go to Unity and race, and that was probably around 1969, probably.
And Ricky, your dad had a big part in you getting started.
Right. And my earliest memories were of racing were 1972, 73. My dad drove for a guy named Bernie Baker, which I always thought was like the premier auto racing or NASCAR name, right? Just Baker. Bernie Baker had a 64 Ford Fairlane, and it was painted rally red, and it had a spark plug on the roof. And the spark plug, there was a big spark plug, and apparently Bernie was colorblind and had a hard time during the night races identifying his car. And so that was what distinguished the 64 number 12 Ford Fairlane from the rest of the field. But I remember, I think it was 73, my dad winning the heat, the semi-feature, and the feature. And everybody in the crowd booing. I don't know why. I don't know if he was a little aggressive. But my mom and my sister and I sitting on a blanket in the grandstands, like that was what fostered me to want to be a race car driver that night.
I'm glad you said that, because I was sitting here and one of the questions I wanted to ask you, I know a lot about your success, but when I ran into Ricky Craven, the name, you had already started your relationship with probably the greatest mentor a young driver could have in Maine, Stan Reserve. But I didn't know the beginning part of your life, what made you want to be a racer. You just explained a lot right there.
But
yeah,
Ricky,
thanks, Pete.
Excuse me, Ricky, you got a car at a pretty young age. Pete talked about piecing a car together. You weren't very old when you were putting some pieces and parts together to race a car.
I was 13 years old. There was a 70 Chevelle in the field, and I went by it every day, twice a day on the school bus. It had a roll cage. It had no doors, and I convinced my dad if he would buy it, I would work on it until I could race it. And
wow.
And that happened. $150 he bought that car for, and we worked for 2 years and got it done. When I was 15, went to Unity Raceway. The second race I ran, I won, and how I remember that more than beyond winning, two things stand out about that evening. Number one, after winning the race, I had to start last because I was a new driver. After winning the race, every driver came up to me that I competed against. Every single driver. Bob Young, Dwayne Seekins, Mike Harnish. I was 15, 16 years old, and they all shook my hand and they said, "Congratulations, kid. If you ever drive me like that again, I'm going to wreck your." And I remember going, every car I passed, because remember I started last, every car I passed, I took a piece of it. And and the other part that distinguished that night was that Bobby Allison was driving the Gatorade car at the time in the Cup Series, flew in as a guest driver, and he came over and said, "Man, that was some great driving. I wanted to see who was driving that number 12." And he gave me his hat.
Oh, wow. And, cool story.
It was, great. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this is connecting with you, Larry, and connecting with Pete, is that it causes you to pause and reflect and think. And I honestly have never gotten the opportunity to do that until the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I don't, at the risk of taking over the show, I have to say, Pete, it's personal to connect with you because you mentioned Stan Meserve. Without a doubt, Stan Meserve was he was my mentor for auto racing and to some degree life. He was a terrific role model as a driver, the mechanical aspect of it. But I was inspired by all the drivers that I witnessed as a child. That includes you, Pete, that, you know, the number X was such a unique brand and your personality went with that X. Dana Graves, Larry Pottle, Dave Darvo. Gosh, I can go. Those are the drivers who had a direct influence on me as a child and what I wanted to do. And I'll tell you something about life. The hardest part about life is making up your mind. It really is. A lot of people struggle with it. I knew at a very early age what I wanted to do. Now, people thought it was unreasonable, but I never deviated from it because I had so much passion for auto racing. I love the smell. I love the sound. I love the characters, the drivers. I love competing. So that's a condensed version of what created my interest in being a race car driver.
Well, I've got a question. Did you two ever race against each other? I mean, you're maybe a generation older than Ricky.
At least.
You know, at least, maybe two. You and I are the same generation. Mm-hmm. But did you two ever get a chance to race against each other that you remember?
I think...
If I did, I probably got beat.
No, that's when... I think maybe... We talked about this earlier, maybe last... the ACT deal, you ran that, okay. Then you ran won a few Busch races one year. That might have been around 91, maybe?
That's correct.
And I think maybe we overlapped a little bit there. I was just getting back into it.
Yeah, I think you think about Pete's racing life, and he was always synonymous or associated with winning. He was in an era early, and my memories of Pete were him competing against Ralph Nason, Stan Meserve, and they had a crazy battle back in the 70s.
Absolutely.
And Pete was formidable, as were Dave Darvo and Dana Graves, as I mentioned. And bottom line, I was coming into the sport as Pete was sort of winding down. And I went to Hickory in 1994, Hickory, North Carolina. And I got to connect with Pete because he was later in life, but he was throttling the competition down there.
He was there.
He was really, he had come into his own in the early 80s when he went south. And I watched every step of the way from afar. He doesn't know that, but I did. It was very inspiring.
Well, I had a interesting, and Pete and I talked about these other shows. He told me, Pete, and for the folks at home, what was your biggest mistake when you went to North Carolina? You won.
Yeah.
They were still fighting the Civil War down there, I think. I'm not sure.
Well, I think a lot of people have gone down and done well. Like McCabe would make an annual trip to Hickory, then go to Martinsville. I think Dion did. They all ran well, presented themselves well.
Right.
And we were fortunate enough to win the second week we were there. And it was like all relationships changed. And I didn't understand the animosity in the beginning until somebody explained to me, you know, back here, and Ricky will understand this, everybody worked during the week and raced on the weekends. Down there, the job was racing. And when I beat whoever I beat, I was taking food off the table. That was the mentality. So it was a little, at that point, it became easier to understand it. I mean, it didn't change how I addressed things, but it made more sense. But it still took a while. I think by the time you got there, a lot of that had changed. It might not have been perfect, but a decade or so later, I think it changed a little.
No, I think it's great perspective, Pete, that the way you described it, that I remember the Oxford 250 sitting in the grandstands each year, and the Southern drivers came up, and they were an authority. Butch Lindley, Bob Presley, Morgan Shepherd, Harry Gant, they were an authority.
Yeah.
I think in most of that was mechanically, and just like Pete said, running 50, 60, 70 races a year, they had a clear advantage. But for this, so it wasn't uncommon for the Southern drivers to come north, but for the Northern drivers to go south and have success was very unusual. Now, Pete and I have never had this conversation, but I will say that every driver, you know, I really didn't learn this until my second life, which was when I retired from driving at the age of 40. I was fortunate enough to have 15 years with ESPN, and I saw things through a different lens, and I studied things that I didn't have time to study as a driver, but I understood them because I experienced it.
Yes.
And every driver that's had success has had that moment where they said, it's time. It's, you know, it's my day. It's my year. It could be, you know, my decade. But if you augur into that, it's all confidence. And I always felt from afar, and again, Pete and I have never had this conversation, but Pete always had the ingredients. But it wasn't until he went south, I believe, because he had to get his car repaired, and he was there and he ran a race, and he didn't have any expectation probably. He wasn't racing against guys that he had raced against every week, and in a lot of cases they won. So maybe you get in your head, maybe I just can't beat him. But when he went south, he had immediate success, and I believe he came into his own, and he was the most confident form of Pete Silver that we've ever seen, and that carried him a long way. He had the wind to his back.
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate. I got there by accident because of an accident, as you say. But I was there 2 weeks before the car was finished being repaired. So I had 14 days of building relationships and gaining knowledge. And I was in an area where that's the main chassis they ran, a banjo chassis. So everybody had tremendous knowledge. And as we talked earlier, Charlie Presley came on board immediately. And he spent his whole life with his father racing for Precision Products, which were, when I got there, they were running the first Grand Am banjo ever built, the 4-car. Jack had the second one, we got the third one. So by the end of that 14 days, every spring rate on that car changed. The front springs changed 200, almost 300 pounds, 250. The rear springs changed a couple hundred pounds. The rake, the tilt. Now I go to the racetrack and I'm sitting in something that really feels like something. But to your point about the people I raced against, those were the people that I was reading about in the magazines. It was kind of intimidating. I had never time trialed in my life. And you show up and there's Tommy Houston, Bob Presley, Harry Gant, Morgan Shepherd, Dale Jarrett. And that's a regular deal at Hickory Speedway in that era. And God must have been looking over me. But I got into the mix right off and was competitive, and it just worked out.
Well, it's an interesting point that Ricky brought up, is you don't have Northern drivers coming to Maine or coming to New England and changing their careers so much as you two fellas, for instance, went to the South and really had careers.
Right.
Well, I think,
Larry, I think that's the ultimate
thing.
point. Go ahead, Pete.
I think the knowledge you gain being here, that's what they've done their whole lives, and everything you're trying to do is based there. And I think you gain a lot from that. Right. You know, McCabe was always good. When Lindley borrowed his car for points at Catamount of Thunder World, I think he gained knowledge from Lindley that made him even better. I think the Southern knowledge at that time was ahead of what we were doing as far as chassis setups and whatever it took to make the car fast.
I think there was so the Stan Reserve went south and competed in the Grand National Series. Pete went south and had success, and so there were drivers from New England sprinkled into the Southern ranks, but any driver would always view the Southern Series and NASCAR as the premier form of racing. And I think for most people, it was just out of reach. I mean, they had families, they were trying to make a living. And maybe that differentiates me from other people is, again, that I didn't know any better. And I was not born with a silver spoon. I mean, to some degree, I don't like the expression I grew up on the other side of the tracks, but none of us knew we were poor, right? Like we had what we needed, but we didn't have, like we built cars out of the junkyard. And
boy, that's the truth.
You evolved and you got better and better. And I just always had my eye on, I had this vision that I wanted to be a big time racer and never deviated from it. Now, again, that's a powerful thing if you buy into it. But I want to catch up with Pete a little bit in that a lot of what he went through helped everybody who followed. Okay, so it's very valuable. I can go back to 1990 when I made my NASCAR debut, won a few races. The next year we won 10 out of 17 races. 3 of those were combination events where we're battling with Jeff Gordon and Bobby Labonte and the Wallace brothers and the Burton brothers. And the last race of the year, which also happened to be the race right before my Cup debut in Rockingham, I had a great battle with Harry Gant and Chuck Bound at New Hampshire. Yeah. And we win the race, and we're going to run that car 2 weeks later, end engine, at Martinsville. So Scott Maxon, who is a brother to me and is at Hendrick, went to Hendrick with me. Scott took the engine apart during post-race inspection, and the Southern officials got really upset with us because it took too long to take the engine apart. And they thought we were hiding something. And we just needed to be careful because we were going to run that engine again. 2 weeks later, we go to Virginia, and we're going through inspection, and they took my carburetor. And I said, what are you doing? And they had this gauge called a go, no-go gauge. Pete knows what that means.
Absolutely.
And they made that carburetor fail, okay? They drove that piece down in there and took the casting ring off the carburetor, and they ruined the carburetor. And they said, your carburetor's illegal. And I said, my carburetor hasn't been illegal all year. And it's the same carburetor that I won at New Hampshire with you guys 2 weeks ago. And the carburetor official, and I won't name names because, you become friends with all these guys later in life. But the carburetor official looked at me and said, well, kid, you're not in New Hampshire this week, are you?
No.
It's called home cooking, Ricky.
I've been through every bit of that.
So that was a sample of the adversity that we might have had being from the North and in their minds really not quite fitting in or maybe not having earned our place yet. And I think everybody goes through that.
I went through so much of that, and I understand exactly what you're saying. And I've been through that same carburetor deal. I was sent home so many times for being too close. Not wrong, you're just too close. Yeah. That day you're going home no matter what your speech is. It was already like it was predestined before the race even started. If you did well, right, you, as a Northerner, you're going home, and that's just what happened.
Did you ever feel like you guys might have been a little too much competition for the local boys?
Oh, I don't know if that's how I ever felt. I just always thought it was a Northern deal. And I want to touch on something. You just talked about the 10 races and 3 combination races. To win the 250, and then 7 days later win at New Hampshire, I just think that's an incredible 7 days in any man's life, and it had to be for you. Incredible.
It was, Pete. I I think the Oxford 250 for all of the guys that were associated with me, all the crew members associated with me, there was the Oxford 250, and then there were all the other races. And we went on this crazy run in the middle of the summer where we won 5 in a row. We won in Jennerstown. We won in Jennerstown, Pennsylvania. We won in Thompson, Connecticut. We won in Flemington, New Jersey. Came back and won in Oxford, then New Hampshire. And but winning the Oxford 250, I go back a year earlier and I won the pole position for the Oxford 250, and it was time trial. And I just felt like, all right, this is my day. And we struggled terribly. Just still puzzled by it. It was just brutal. And we came back the next year and we qualified like 6th, and we were dominant. We were just, it was our day. Everything was right about that day. Yeah. And when we won the Oxford 250, it felt like the Daytona 500, because that, for a New England boy, but particularly being from Maine and attending that event, that was a life-changing moment.
Ricky, when you look back, it's a heck of a long ways from Unity, Maine to Daytona, Florida. Right. And a lot of laps and a lot of miles in between. What do you take away from that as you walk through your life?
Yeah, I think
you had some incredible people along the way.
Yeah, well, I think that's number one. Your affiliations with the people that put in all the hard work, and they did it for themselves, and that they wanted to be part of a team. But if you gave them enough, if you inspired them, then they did it for you as well, because they saw the potential. So they just worked harder because they wanted to contribute to that. And I think what I learned, and what Pete and I have discussed here for the last 10, 15 minutes, is that you have to embrace adversity. You have to be resilient, because the best drivers in the world, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt, particularly in the second era, not before say 72 or 3, but after, those drivers that were dominant only won 15% of the races. And that was only for a very brief amount of time. My point being, you lose a lot more races than you win.
Oh, God.
So you've got to be resilient, and you've got to find a way to put last week's race in the rearview mirror and immediately shift your focus toward what's happening this week and how you're preparing for this race. And when you graduate from each series, you're reminded, it's very quickly, you understand that the level of competition has changed. It's elevated. And I remember my Cup season in 1995. I've been brutally honest with you, I was scared to death, because I'd worked my whole life to get there, and I was scared to death that I was going to blow it and fail. And I worked so hard in 95 to win Rookie of the Year that I was exhausted in December. I really was wiped out. And 1996 was so much easier, because I proved that I legitimized my existence to some degree. And then 96, I felt like, okay, I belong here. And I had a different frame of mind, and I had different results. I started off in 96 with a tremendous year. I told Pete earlier in the day, after 8 races, we were 3rd in points. And I really felt like, wow, everything is falling into place. We went to Talladega for the 9th race. I end up in the fence. I broke my back. I get helicoptered to Birmingham Hospital, and that is what I mean by adversity. I was dealt that was the first time I was ever injured in a race car, and it had a profound effect on my season.
Well, if anybody is ever wondering what you're talking about, go back on YouTube and look at that.
Yeah.
That is the most, anybody that's a race fan has seen some incredible wrecks. That one ranks up right up there, is as bad as any of them. How you live through it is surprising to me. But I have this question. Your family, man, your children, your mom and dad, how do they deal with their son, who's not only a NASCAR star, but he's in the most dangerous sport that you could possibly be in? How do you, and certainly seeing your kid go into the fence, holy smokes, I can't imagine the horrifying feelings that come over you. I don't know if they were at the race or not, but they certainly were probably watching.
They were. In fact, my wife at the time was 6 months pregnant.
Oh,
and didn't get to see me. I went from the ambulance to the helicopter to Birmingham Speedway. So, Larry, it's an excellent point, and I'll tell you that Pete can expand on this, but it doesn't matter where you're racing, Unity Raceway or Daytona 500. When you put the helmet on, the window net goes up. You've compartmentalized everything else, and you're focused on that objective. All the noise goes away. If you're really on your game, everything slows down. You're ahead of the car. You anticipate the car. You feel the car, whether it's the front of the car is bad or the back of the car is bad. You're not surprised. When you're injured, you go home, somebody else gets in your car while you're out. You're miserable because you're injured. You're in a lot of pain, and you see the expression on your wife's face, and you see the concern from your children who are very emotional. You get calls from your mom and your sister or your dad or your friends, and that exposes you to an element that you really don't want to be a part of. Like, you just don't allow yourself to think about the risks associated with being a NASCAR driver. I use the 2001 Daytona 500 as the most obvious example. It's the American dream, right? To win the Daytona 500. And our greatest driver of all time, arguably, lost his life, Dale Earnhardt, at the Daytona 500. And so whether it's an injury or losing a colleague, it causes you to reevaluate, right? Rethink the whole thing. And you don't want to spend too much time doing that because it will have a negative effect on you as a race car driver. You know, I could spend an hour just talking about that today because I'm 56 years old and there's no risk. But when you're a race car driver and you've gotten hurt and you've got to get back in that car and go 200 miles an hour into the corner, 3 wide, you can't allow anybody in your world to think that you're bothered by that. And I went through a little bit of that when I was released and worked my way back into the car.
That's I might take you up on that hour at another time, Ricky, because I think that those are things that people don't hear at home about, the personal side of racing, the glory of being in NASCAR and being the winning drivers and all the glitz and glory that goes with it. But there is a family.
I want to share a quick story because you mentioned that those aren't I love sharing things with people that they wouldn't otherwise have ever known. As an example, I got hurt in a race car twice in my 25 years of competing. The Talladega wreck was what looked the worst, but actually I got hurt worse at Texas the following year.
I was going to ask you about that.
That was your concussion, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I actually woke up in the car, Pete, but I lost my vision.
Jesus.
I had blood coming from my ears, and they helicoptered me to the Parkland Hospital in Dallas. I spent the residual of all of that, and I spent 3.5 months training at Panther Stadium in downtown Charlotte. And I had the best doctors, I had the best trainers, physical, so even the mental aspect of it. Rick Hendrick sent me to Virginia with a sports psychologist. And when I came back, ironically, when I was allowed to compete again, the next race was New Hampshire.
Remember that.
which was perfect. Do you remember that, Pete?
Oh, yeah, you sat on the pole, I believe.
Sat on the pole, exactly. And I felt like $1,000,000. My uniforms didn't fit because I was eating chicken, fish, and steak 3 times a day and working out twice a day with a trainer named Columbo. If you ever get the chance to work out with this guy named Columbo, don't, okay? He'll hurt you. But I came back as a pure athlete. I remember waking up race day morning. I'm on the pole. My teammate Jeff Gordon's outside pole. And I said, I'm going to wear them out. I'm going to wear them out. I've never been better, and I've never been stronger. Physically and mentally, I'm ready. I lead the first 20 laps. Jeff gets me loose. He slides underneath me. My spotter, Keith Coldsback, says, you going to put up with that? Because he got into my left rear a little bit. I got back to him, got him loose, passed him. And about 25 laps later, on a July race in Loud, New Hampshire, 90-degree day. So 45, 50 laps into the race, I'm done. I am done. I just am melting in the car, and I limp home like 13th. Well, what had happened is that I had been training for 3.5 months in an air-conditioned facility.
They don't have air conditioning those race cars, Ricky.
I hadn't accounted for the 135, 145 degree in-car temps. And from that point on, I was so devastated. I got an elliptic treadmill. It would go 12 degrees. I put it in my garage. I put 3 sweatshirts on, and I would run on that treadmill for an hour every day that I was home with 3 sweatshirts on. That's how I prepared for the conditions inside the race car. And I never got out of a car again, wiped out.
That's a cool story. Pete, I've got to ask you guys, and I know, of course, Ricky raced against the best in the world, but Pete, you raced against some who's the toughest guy you ever raced against?
Well, we were talking about that earlier. Bob Presley, probably. Jack Ingram. Bob was just rough. He just born and bred rough. He was tough. He's won 400 or 500 races, and that didn't happen by accident. But if you touched him by accident, he came back at you to make sure you remembered not to do it by accident again. I think Robert was like that at one time. I think Robert got a little of that from him, but he was just like that. He was just tough. I want to ask you a question backing up a little bit to the 10-race season and all that success on the combination races. How did you get the ride in the Oldsmobile with Dick Moroso to go to Rockingham?
So that was just a set of circumstances, a difficult set of circumstances, really, Pete. But it's about timing and opportunity and capitalizing.
Boy, that's big, yes.
Right? It's all about those opportunities you have to capitalize on. Well, unfortunately, Dick had lost his son, Rob, to a car accident.
Right.
And he was lost. Dick became a very, very good friend. And he was over the top excited about racing together. And I think in some ways, Dick was trying to find a substitute for his son.
Oh, that makes sense.
And I think it was just part of the therapy for him, was to take a chance on a young guy as opposed to somebody that's seasoned and obvious. And so we went to Rockingham, and I think when I reflect about that, Buddy Parrott was my crew chief.
Wow, that's a big time deal.
That's a big name.
It was just an incredible experience because I'm still living up north. I fly south for 2 weeks. Every morning, Buddy and I would meet and go to Waffle House.
That's a Southern tradition down there.
Yeah, I'd never been to a Waffle House, but there's 2 places that everybody associated with, and you didn't argue about it. It would be church on Sunday and the Waffle House during the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And and everybody would congregate. Anyway, we went, and Buddy and I got to know each other, and he helped me understand the political side of the sport. It's really amazing because he's such an incredible human being. Really, really, really great guy. And then became good friends with his boys. And Todd and Brad had great careers. And but he was the right guy at the right time. And but back to Dick Moroso. You know, Dick never got out of Cup racing what he was destined to have before, after his son passed.
That's a good point.
And
Good point.
right, because with Rob, the sky was the limit, and then even people that are close to Dick would say that Dick was compromised as far as his emotions. I mean, he was sort of one leg in, one leg out, but it was a fabulous experience for me. And what it told me was that I wasn't quite ready. Because I went to Rockingham and we were reasonable, but I wasn't ready for 500-mile races. So he wanted to go to Atlanta the next week, and I refused. I said, no, I'm not ready. And it was a good decision.
That makes a lot of sense to admit that. That's tough when you have the opportunity in front of you that you've been waiting to have. Got to know what it felt like coming down pit road when you made that race. I mean, I know how I felt when I made that 200-lapper at Hickory in the top 3. What did that feel like to you?
I honestly, if you don't mind, let me just say that from the time I got to Rockingham to the time I rolled into victory lane at Martinsville was a blur. In other words, I just never, ever lifted off the gas.
Yeah.
I traveled around the world. I raced in Japan 2 different years. I did so many things, but I can't honestly say that I had a great time because I had an objective. I was competing. Yeah. Now, here's the point that I'm trying to make, Larry and Pete, that when I rolled into victory lane at Martinsville, the whole world for me was complete.
You got your win.
I got my win. And there was a time when I was in the Parkland Hospital at Texas and I had no vision. I had blurred vision. And I actually signed my next of kin because I had no family with me. And I made peace with God because I was scared. I was so scared.
Well, anybody would be.
Yeah, and I didn't care if I ever raced again. Yeah. But from that point to the point all the way back to where I got the opportunity to drive the Tide car, I knew that would probably be my best and last opportunity to win a Cup race. And I was not going to miss out on that.
No, and to hold off Dale Jarrett, who was going to win the championship that year, I mean, he was all over you those last few laps. So, I mean, it isn't like you just won the race. You held off probably the hottest guy at the time. Do you remember that?
What I love about that day is that it happened at the place that I could celebrate and I could really give tribute to all of the people in my life that had influence.
Yeah.
And I mean, it goes on and on and on. You talk about Bob Presley and Jack Ingram, the people who really challenged you. Well, nothing challenges you the way Dale Earnhardt could challenge you, or Jeff Gordon, or Rusty Wallace, or Bill Elliott, and Mark Martin, and on and on and on. But when I won at Martinsville, it wasn't about those guys. I beat those guys. Yeah. I beat Tony Stewart and Ricky Rudd and all those great names. When I won at Martinsville, it was about Dick McCabe, Dave Dion, Robbie Crouch, Ralph Nason, Stan Meserve, Pete Silva, Larry Pottle. It was about every driver that I learned something from racing short tracks throughout New England and Canada. Mike Rowe, Joey Carafas.
Yeah.
I mean, every one of these drivers, they gave me something and I put it on my hard drive. And I went and got it when I needed it. Go back to the last 20 laps at Martinsville. That was my race to win. I led the most laps. Late in the race, we got 2 tires. Dale Jarrett got 4. And I just drove away for 10 laps. But then the new tires are coming. And those are the best 20 laps I've ever driven in my life.
Incredible, really. I watched it.
And that was the residual again. That was a component of Unity Raceway, Oxford Plains, Beach Ridge, Speedway 95. I mean, that's why I can feel so good about it. That was the smallest track in NASCAR, and that's what I loved. I loved that short track racing. And Pete, you were a hell of a short track racer, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
So Ricky, we can't let you go until we talk about the one that everybody talks about with Kurt Busch and you nose to nose, side to side, and you beat him by 2 inches or something like that at Darlington. You talk about the last 20 at Martinsville. Those last 2 or 3 at Darlington were nothing to sneeze at.
What's cool about that, Larry, is that I have that car. It's a piece of history. It was the first piece donated to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And Kurt Busch and I became good friends because of that race. And, you know, he was in the very early innings, maybe the first inning of his career. I was in the 8th or 9th inning of my career. I remember when I first walked into Darlington, the very first time, I said, what in the hell have I gotten into? You know, nothing in New England could prepare you for Darlington.
Amen to that. I've been there.
Right?
Yes.
In fact, Pete, there's probably not a track on the planet that could prepare you for Darlington. And I made it a personal objective to run well there. And I did run well, but I never was able to finish the job until that particular day. Well, we finished it by just a little bit.
It's a testament to both of you and Kurt Busch that because you easily could have gone 180 degrees, I'm going to get that son of a gun the next time we go around. That's really cool. And I've watched a lot of the YouTube interviews with both you guys afterwards, and it's another level of respect amongst competitors.
Kurt and I are going to be in Darlington celebrating the 20th anniversary of that race next month.
Oh, cool stuff. We'll have to watch. Make sure we catch that one.
Yeah. I've been a Kurt Busch fan for a long time. He had his issues, but I think he's a hell of a driver. Become a hell of a person, really.
I love the way you said that, Pete, because, you know, everybody in life has an issue.
Yeah.
They have great years, they have tough years, and, you know, but you measure them over the long haul. And there were times where Kurt was not an easy taste. You know, he was like, kind of rub you the wrong way early on, but he grew up and he took everything like a man, and he became very popular.
I've got to back up because I know folks at home are going to say, we found out who Pete's toughest guy was, and you named off a whole string of legends, Earnhardt, Gordon, Jarrett. Who is the toughest to race against?
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Let me just say, on the short track, I give very high marks to short track racing at how about this? Harry Gant was a gentleman, arguably the greatest guy I ever raced against, as far as he gave you all you deserved, but wouldn't run you into the wall. He just had very, very good car control. Mark Martin, same thing. I think Rusty Wallace is one of the best short track racers I ever competed against, but I'd also put Mike Rowe or Robbie Crouch in that same category. I think Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart were the greatest road racers I ever competed against. There was nobody, period, that understood Daytona, Talladega, restrictor plate racing, or, you know, super speedway racing like Dale Earnhardt. And I'll tell you a real quick story to illustrate this is when I went to Daytona for the first time, and I got in the car, it was crazy, right, Pete? You know, just full throttle, crazy, nothing like what we had done. And I couldn't go any faster. And as just a kid, I didn't feel like I fit in down there. This is in January of 1992. And I crossed paths with Dale Earnhardt, and he said, "Why are you so damn close to the wall?" And I go, I don't know. I mean, that's what we do. We go down in the corner, you go down to the apron, and then you let it drift to the wall, right? No matter where you race. And he goes, "What if you were plowing snow? I mean, it's going up against the wall and it's coming right back and hitting the front of your car." He said, "Get the hell away from the wall." Because Dale was very short on words, right to the point. And I went back out without telling my crew anything. I just changed what I was doing. And I picked up a half a second, like 2 miles per hour. And that's just what he shared with me. He must have been rolling around the apron when I went by.
Yeah.
But Dale Earnhardt was in a class by himself on a lot of tracks, but mostly Daytona and Talladega.
You think you could really see the air?
Well, I think he had a sense of every position he was in on the racetrack and or around the cars and the effect it had.
I think he could feel it really well.
He could feel it, and he knew how to stall cars out by dumping air onto their spoiler. It was so obvious in hindsight. If you go back and watch in the 80s, in the early 90s, he had mastered it before anybody else even knew what was going on.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right, and he also had mastered dragging the brake and separating himself to the point where he would drag, if he was in second, he would drag the brake back to the car. In third, he would feel the RPMs go up 100 RPM or 150 RPM. He'd release the brake, and he would get a run on the leader. And, of course, we all figured it out over time, but he was way ahead of everybody else. I think that in some ways, the toughest competitor that I ran against, for instance, in 1991, would have been Dick McCabe. Dick McCabe was a hero when I was a kid. I've always thought the world of Dick McCabe, but I grew to despise him in 91 because I was the young guard coming in and I was dominating, and Dick didn't like it.
You were the young hotshot.
Yeah, and he roughed me up a little bit, and I've never gotten the opportunity to do this. I will someday. I took it personal, some of the things he did, but he was the right guy at the right time also. Just like I mentioned Buddy Parrott. Like, I've had 1,000 of those situations, but Dick McCabe helped me. He toughened me. He galvanized me. And he wasn't going to just give me a free pass. And I really benefited from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's some good stuff. So we've got two different generations of race car, NASCAR guys here. So from your perspective, Ricky, with the new generation for the folk, we're getting low on time here, but I wanted to
we got plenty of time.
Okay, good deal. we may still be here tonight, Pete. So, but I'm really curious because when Pete came along in the 80s, race car drivers were 23, 24, 26, 27 years old. When you came along and started in your NASCAR career, you were in your early 20s. Now these guys are like out of high school, for gosh sakes. How much do you think that technology like simulators and like that has helped today's generation of the stars down on, Kyle Larson and these guys that are running NASCAR now, these younger kids?
Yeah, it's a completely different era. Like most sports, it's changed, it's evolved, and it's really not I don't think it's a healthy debate, and we're not having it, obviously, but because you didn't ask me this, but do I like it or dislike it? I don't, neither. I try to look at the sport today and say, and pick things out and say, wow, I'm so impressed with guys like Kyle Larson or Chase Elliott, because if, to consistently run that well, you just have to have talent.
Yeah. But
even though I felt like I raced in the greatest era of NASCAR, and most people would agree with this, that when Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt got together at NASCAR's highest level, we all were the beneficiaries of it. I mean, it was just an incredible fleet of talent, at the Cup Series, but it also had the most exposure it's ever had. It had the most sponsorship. It had the greatest attendance, and I'm really grateful to have experienced that. Personally, no matter how old I get, I've always carried the 1970s as the greatest memories and the greatest form of racing. That's just me, right? That we all have that capacity, that we can say, I am this because of this. And I became 1995 Winston Cup Rookie of the Year because of all those people that I watched in the 1970s. I was just fascinated. I was just a kid, but I was just fascinated with it. I loved the Novas and the Pontiac Grand Ams and the Oldsmobile Cutlasses, and I admired the drivers of those cars, and then I got to compete with her, and I have fond memories of the 1970s and the old NASCAR North, Pete. I don't know if there was a greater time for racing in New England than the old NASCAR North.
I agree with you. I was there a very short time. Bucky, the Budweiser guy, had growing pains, so we bought a used Laughlin car and a banjo motor and dabbled in '79, and it was mind-boggling. Multiple reasons. I'd never been anywheres, but so we'd go to Thunder Road on Thursday night. We'd go to Catamount on Saturday night, then get into Plattsburgh, New York, and get on a barge with a truck and trailer and float into New York or Canada and race a 100-lapper. But between the Canadian drivers, and you mentioned McCabe, the Dragons, Dion,
right,
Crouch. I mean, it was for New England. It was a who's who, and it was like a mini Cup Series for me, actually, to go to something at that level. It was incredible. You're right.
Do you guys have a?
How about this? I'm sorry, Larry. How about this? Because this is the great thing about this hour with you guys is that Pete and I've gotten to connect, like friends. And Larry, getting to meet you, you've got such a rich history of auto racing in Maine, and I really appreciate what you do for all the people associated with motorsports in Maine, and you represent all that. But, Pete, I got to say that when you mention the Dragon Brothers and Stub Fadden, the Dion brothers,
oh yeah,
Robbie Crouch, John Paul Cabana,
yes,
Landis Caron, Claude Leclerc. I mean, these are wonderful human beings.
They are, you're right.
And so the 20-year-old version of me never stopped to say, hey, guys, you're really cool. The 25-year-old version of me never stopped and said, McCabe, you're a good guy. You're tough. You're a great racer, but thank you. The 15-year-old me, was in awe of Pete and Pottle, Nason, and Meserve. But today at 56 and spending an hour with you two, I just realized, like, the people that I got to experience and become colleagues and friends all the way, hundreds of people, just great experiences.
You kind of pinch yourself, and you both raced in different eras of NASCAR. You in the real infancy, and Ricky like in the heyday of it. And you raced against the who's who in racing. You ever stop and just reminisce and say, I raced against those guys. I had a coffee with those guys, or I might have had an adult beverage with those guys after the race and talked about what it was and what I did right or what I did wrong in the fourth turn in the last lap.
Well, you make a good point. Now that the dust is settled, you get a chance to go back and really appreciate those people you raced against. And I'm sure he'll agree with me. It didn't take long to realize why those guys are looked at the way they are when you get there. Like you said, you weren't ready when you went to Rockingham. I'll tell you what, they give you an eye-opener. You might be running good and winning a lot of races over here, but when you show up on in their doghouse, so to speak, you understand what's going on and why they are what they are. You have to pick yourself up to compete with them. But yes, I sit back now and realize how lucky I was. When they're kicking your butt, you don't feel that lucky. and that appreciative of what they are. Going back to Stan and Ralph when you're trying to learn how to race at Unity, and it's now you look back and say incredible, just incredible.
Well, you made me think, Pete, you just made me think about the reason that we were not able to do that. The reason we weren't able to acknowledge how great all those people were was because we hated them.
Probably.
Think about that, right?
Probably.
I mean, so think about this. I mean, I can take this all the way up through. One of my closest friends, and I just spent 2 days with him, Jeff Gordon. But there were times where I'd get out of the car and I was so angry at him, and I thought he was such a jerk. And then there were times you get out of the car and somebody that you really enjoyed during the week, Kenny Wallace and I were buddies. And I roughed him up one time, and he hated me for a month. But that's what racing did, and it was required. You could not be friends on race day. If you did, you got beat. And I had a hard time with that sometimes, but
well, Ricky,
you learn the hard way.
If it's any consolation, as you get older, and Pete can attest to this, you get smarter.
Let's not get carried away here.
I'm still waiting for that, Larry.
Yeah.
My dad. I always say is my dad is I got to 40, he turned into an Einstein, and he was 70.
Yeah. You're giving us a lot of credit, I think.
Well, Ricky, we're running out of time. I can't say thank you enough for zooming in with us and spending this hour on the Vintage Roundtable race of Pete Silva, my guest Ricky Craven by Zoom. Any final words, Ricky?
Yeah, I do have a couple final words. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and there are guys. I saw a clip of your first show or an earlier show, but you had guys like Fuzzy Holden on there. And, I think about, there's just so many names that I remember, but I wasn't associated with them. But they're an important part of the equation, So what you're doing is you're bringing them all back to the forefront, and you're giving them the attention they deserve. And I really appreciate it. I really do. At the end of the day, we're all the same. All of us. We're just the same. And I really admire what you both are doing for Maine Motorsports.
Oh, thank you, Ricky. I appreciate that. Pete?
And I want to thank you because this was the exact interview I was hoping to get from you.
Yeah.
There's things I knew about you, but I didn't know about you. And I think the new fan knows your success, but they don't know the ride for you to get there. And wonderful job. Thank you.
And
thank you, Pete.
I want to get you back
you.
on, Ricky, and we'll talk broadcasting as I'm learning this broadcasting deal. You can give me all the hints of ESPN and Fox Racing.
You're doing a great job, Larry. Keep it up.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ricky.
So, folks at home, this has been our Vintage Roundtable Racing. My special guest today have been Hall of Famers Pete Silva and Ricky Craven. I hope you've enjoyed it half as much as I've enjoyed it, and we'll see you back here for show number 4 in another week. Thanks a lot. Special thanks to my guest tonight, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, folks.
Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. We have premium medicinal cannabis and accessories to get you on track. Elevation Station, 132 Waldoboro Road in Jefferson, Maine. All aboard!